Hello everyone, kia ora, bulavanaka, talofa lava, halo, kia orana, halo oketa, and a very warm welcome to this Business Link Pacific webinar, Navigating Through the COVID-19 Storm Part 2. Thank you so much for joining us all today from wherever you are in the world. If you haven't done so already, please take a moment to do the short survey. The link is posted into the chat box in the top right-hand corner of your screen. Most of you will have received the link to the survey and the reminder this morning. So if you haven't had a chance to do it, please do so now. Your answers will be anonymous, but it will help inform our webinar presenter today with her discussion points. And we'll share those survey results during the course of the webinar. So before we get started, I'd just like to make a couple of introductions and share some important information with you. Just some general housekeeping points. For the duration of the webinar, please keep your microphone and camera on mute. This helps with our presenter having a nice clear feed so you can all see and hear her throughout the whole presentation. There will be one Q&A session today at the very end, and plus a couple of opportunities for feedback as well. And we do encourage you, if you have any questions throughout the course of the presentation, please do type them into the chat box. If we run out of time for questions, we will make a note of your question and answer you separately via email. If you do need to leave halfway through, or if you can't, if you think there's somebody who might benefit from today's webinar, we will be sending out a recording later today via email, and all our webinars are available on our website. So for those of you who have just recently joined the BLP network, either as an advisor or an SME, or even if you've been with us for a little while, here's just a very quick refresher of what BLP is all about. So we are a New Zealand government-funded private sector development initiative delivered by DT Global. We currently work in 6 countries: Samoa, Fiji, Vanuatu, Papua New Guinea, and more recently the Solomon Islands and Cook Islands. We work in partnership with chambers of commerce, financial institutions, and the private sector to develop a business advisory service provider network in the Pacific region that improves access of business services to growing SMEs. And we do all of this by offering 3 main services. We have a free online business health check, which helps businesses identify where there might be gaps that could benefit from business advice. We also have an online business continuity planner, another free business tool similar to the health check that's focused on business continuity planning. We have a searchable database of over 90 BLP approved business advisors. All of our business advisors go through a quality assurance process to ensure they are reliable and qualified. We offer a BLP subsidy scheme, which helps growing businesses gain access to quality business advice and support at a subsidized rate from our business advisors. Since 2018, we've supported Pacific Island businesses in many ways, and if you want to learn more about our services and what we can offer you either as a business advisor or as a growing business, please visit our website, businesslinkpacific.com. So our webinar presenter today, this is her second time presenting for us, and we're very happy to have her back again. It's Belinda Botha. She is owner-operator of Side Dive Munda Consulting, and Solomon Islands Discovery Cruises in the Solomon Islands. She's a dual South African and Canadian citizen and has been a resident in the Solomons for 7 years. She's an instructor certifier for Scuba Schools International and has over 20 years of international human resources consulting experience, as well as a master's degree in HR management and industrial psychology. Side Dive Munda has just recently started offering virtual COVID-19 human capital consulting services in the tourism and dive sectors for South Pacific nations, and they've also become a BLP quality approved business advisor in our network. In this webinar, Belinda will be continuing on building the essentials needed to navigate through this COVID-19 storm, as covered in part 1. Welcome, Belinda.
Excellent. Thank you very, very much. Good morning, everybody, especially my South Pacific One Talks. Thank you very much for joining today. And if it's okay, I'm going to start my presentation right now. Can I just double check that everybody can see my presentation on the screen right now?
It looks good to me, Belinda.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Anusha. Thank you very much to everybody. It looks like we have quite a representation across the Pacific. So thank you very much for joining me today for the second part of my series in navigating through the COVID-19 storm. Part 2 today focuses a little bit more on leadership, our own and our employees' mental health and well-being, and also how to become and be a COVID-19 responsible operator. We're going to zoom in a bit more on creative ideas. And thank you, everybody that's already completed the welcome poll. I see some really cool answers coming in and some fabulous ideas. We'll also share some thoughts from other approved business advisors. Some of my fellows, my colleagues has shared with me on a pre-recording what their tips would be for navigating through the COVID-19 storm and also what they have done with their clients. So I'm really looking forward to share those stories with you. This is really the time for us to think outside of the tourism and the pandemic box. So it's some really nice ideas and I would love to share them with you. Thank you very much for the nice introduction. I'm not going to say anything more about the businesses that I am running and also the work that I've done specifically in the Solomon Islands. I think the intro was wonderfully done. So thank you very much for that, Anusha. I'm going to start by just briefly sharing an introduction on what we will be covering today. So the outline, we'll have a look at the outlook. You will remember if you've joined the first webinar that we took a lot of time to really unpack what the current situation looks like, specifically as it pertains to the situation in the Pacific, in the South Pacific. We unpacked a lot of numbers, figures, and we talked about how this is going to change for us in terms of dealing with the COVID-19 crisis in the Pacific. So we spent a lot of time doing that during our first meeting, and we'll unpack a few more things today. So what do we need to remember? What are those global observations? We'll check in on the welcome poll. Again, thanks everybody that participated. If you haven't yet, you still have time. Share your stories with us. I'm then going to chat a bit more about leadership during times of crisis. I think nowhere more than now is it important to understand what leadership means and also really looking at what different hat do you need to wear during a time of crisis. We will then introduce another chat box survey. Who's your COVID-19 leader and why? So start thinking about that as well. As I've mentioned, we will look at two separate clusters of Business Link Pacific approved advisor stories, and we'll share that with you during 2 times in the presentation. I'm also going to talk a bit more about a mental health strategy and plan. What do we need to look at when we talk about our own mental health and well-being, specifically as it pertains to dealing with this crisis, and also what do we need to do for our employees? This is very often forgotten, but I think it is critical that we look at this now and continue to put those strategies in place that will help us moving forward. We'll share another story, and then we're going to look at what it means to be a COVID-19 responsible operator. As we're starting to rebuild, we're starting to re-enter the realm of tourism or international travel, what does it mean for us to be ready to accept this new challenge? We'll check in on the results of who's your leadership idol, and we'll do a Q&A session and some thank you right at the end with a short summary. So without further ado, let's start. As before, you'll see me sharing some wonderful inspirational quotes. And of course, this time around, we'll be looking at leadership quotes. So the first one that I would like to start off, which I find super inspiring, is one by Dr. Martin Luther King. The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in the moments of comfort, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. How true is that for today? Excellent. So let's start with a little bit of the outlook. We talked about this during our first presentation quite in detail, but we know COVID-19 is here to stay. It's been about 5-6 weeks since we last chatted about this challenge. So much has happened, but yet nothing has happened for us in the Pacific. We are still dealing with the same issues. We are still finding it really challenging. And we have still not seen any borders opening up. We haven't seen any bubbles. So we know that it's here to stay, and it's probably going to be here for a while. We know that tourism is a huge concern for us in the Pacific. Globally, tourism contributes 10.4% of global GDP, and it supports 1 out of every 10 jobs on this planet. But we know that in the Pacific, it's a much stronger situation, and the picture is painted very differently. It's for us, we are as small island nations, in some cases almost 80% dependent on tourism. So this is really a critical outlook for us as we watch and wait and see what we need to know and what the outlook would be for us for the next several months. So balancing it all is quite important. We know that it is a health crisis, it's an economic crisis, it's a social, mental health and well-being crisis, but it's also a human crisis, perhaps even a human rights crisis. So balancing it all is really important for us. And as leaders, we need to understand the role that we play. Doing business, this is my personal opinion, and I feel very strongly about it. Doing business, strategizing, planning, operating in the old traditional ways only, although proven successful in the pre-COVID world, may not be 100% applicable, and some of those concepts may become obsolete in the new post-COVID world. So we really have to adapt and think outside of the pandemic or even the tourism box, as to reframe the future of travel and just in general reframe the future of how we run our businesses in the Pacific now. It is really that critical time of change. We all want to build back better, and this is the positive message. There is a new normal out there. This is unprecedented times, but we are still all in this together, and the whole concept of travel later has been adopted across the world, and I think those are positive messages. But how else do we find hope and inspiration during this time? For me, really what I want to highlight during this time together is understanding the interdependence of the mental health and well-being for us as business owners, as SMEs, as leaders, it is entrepreneurs. It is really interdependent with the success of the business. How we feel and how we react to this crisis is going to have a direct impact on the success of our business. So really want to focus on that today. So I guess this is the time for us to check in with Anusha and see what ideas you have had and what ideas you guys have shared with us and what you have done in the Pacific to help weather this COVID-19 storm. Anusha?
Thanks, Belinda. Yeah, we've got some great responses back from people, both during the webinar now and before, from this morning. So we've got, like you said, a nice mix of people from all over the world, actually. We've got someone joining us from Canada. Wow. We've got someone from Vanuatu, Australia, New Zealand, Solomon Islands, Papua New Guinea, Samoa and Fiji. The sectors that most of our participants are operating in, we've got quite a large range as well. We've got business development and support, ecotourism, business advisory consulting. There's a scuba diving industry person here. We've got accounting, tourism consulting, tourism and consultancy. And then the big question, the last question, what ideas did you implement as an operator in the South Pacific to help weather the COVID-19 storm in your business? So Belinda, I'll just quickly read off what we've got so far. We have zero revenue. However, features or upgrades to our product that we're planning for 2021 have been added now. We've pivoted our business to focus full-time on our consultancy business. We've introduced products and service innovation and effective cost management. Someone said that they've increased in online activities and have a closer collaboration with other similar organizations, increased coaching, taking advantage of less expats and TAs being in the country, increased online accounting, transactions, meetings, and learning. They've done the business health check, the business continuity plan, a business strategy plan, diversifying services to stay relevant, implemented virtual meetings with clients, reached out to foreign investors to supplement severely restricted cash flow, focused on local domestic tourism, and last one here is implementation of digital training products to allow businesses to still access revenue streams. So a huge range of ideas that people have implemented in the Pacific so far.
Wow, excellent. Thank you, Anusha. Wow, I love those answers because it clearly indicates that as a business in the Pacific, we are resilient, we are looking at the environment, and it actually reminds me of what we've covered off in our first webinar when we talked about the 10 essential Ps in terms of what we need to remember during this crisis. And I'm going to just quickly share them again because I hear them pop up everywhere in those answers. And for those of you that were not able to listen to the first webinar, this may be actually quite interesting. So we looked at the 10 Ps and they were positivity, finding perspective, planning, pragmatic problem solving, persistence, being proactive, prioritizing, focus on the people, finding possibility in products, being patient, and then also forming partnerships. So it is interesting that those ideas that came and the stuff that our fellow businesses in the Pacific have done certainly looked at those key Ps as well. So thank you so much for sharing. I think it's great tips for all of us to keep in mind. How true is this? The crisis you have to worry about is the one that you don't see coming. Well, I don't think any one of us, nor any government or any country in the world, saw this crisis come. And certainly when we saw it arriving, we did not anticipate it lingering and staying for so long. So I think governments around the world really have a dual responsibility here, prioritizing public health and safety, citizen safety, but also protecting jobs and businesses, which is the essential challenge that I see every single country working through and trying to figure out at the moment. That leads us, I guess, nicely into some global observations. What has changed since we last chatted or not? And what are the things that we would want to remember during this time? So I'm just going to quickly run through some global observations, specifically as it pertains to the economy. A couple of updates. The Asian Development Bank predicts that we will see about a 15% contraction in GDP in 2020, and this is specifically for us in the Pacific. That's really quite worrying. The World Health Organization warns that the pandemic is likely to be lengthy. At the moment, we see 115 destinations across the world still having borders 100% closed. This is international borders. But the responsible restart of tourism is starting to happen. We see 40% of global destinations have now starting to ease travel restrictions. This includes domestically, but also some international travel. So the restart is underway, thank goodness, but confidence is low. We see that reflecting in tourism numbers, but we also see that reflected in how comfortable people are to travel. We remember from our first webinar, we talked about what the traveler wants to see, and still the key factor here is wanting to understand and make sure that the destination is really focused on safety, health, and all of those concerns are being met. UNWTO released recent data indicating that the impact of tourism, the impact of this, pandemic on tourism at the end of May will lead to about $320 billion loss in revenue. Guys, this is astonishing. It's 3 times as much as the global economic crisis during 2008, 2009. So those numbers are astonishing. This year, we expected nearly $5 billion worth in passenger revenue generated for people taking to the skies. But it's now actually more than likely than less than half will do so. And as this global crisis continue, that number will be reduced yet even more. So we know that traffic may not return to 2019 levels until perhaps as late as 2024. So what does it mean for us as island nations, and what does it mean for us in the Pacific? The travel bubble, oh my goodness, please for the bubble continues as the situation really becomes desperate for some tourism operators and for some of our Pacific nations. I don't need to elaborate here on where we are with the Cook Islands and some of our other nations that's really almost 100% dependent on tourism, and this is really challenging for them. I see some interesting shifts. It's almost like there is a forced diversification and a return back to our agricultural roots of old in some of our Pacific nations. Certainly we see that in the Solomon Islands. As this resurgence of the virus and the risk of new lockdowns and curfews continue, it paints perhaps a bleaker picture for us in the Pacific. I don't need to elaborate of what we're currently seeing for our friends in Australia, specifically in Melbourne. These things will have a continuous negative impact and effect for us as South Pacific nations. We will most likely not see borders open up for us in the Pacific for some time yet. And the reason here mostly means low level of preparedness, health systems, and disaster resilience by our nations. So that's basically the number one reason. Furthermore, high-risk ventures as nations becomes desperate. It's interesting all the things that our Pacific nations are starting to look at, who they form partnerships and alliances with, and what they are focusing on. But it's not all doom and gloom. This is about a positive message, and I'm super encouraged to see some really cool ideas, not only coming from our operators and from the businesses in the Pacific, which you've clearly indicated that there are some beautiful ideas coming through, but also about what countries are doing and what decisions they are making. Some cool ideas is selling off some high-end resorts. We've seen that happening in Fiji. And this is a really interesting one that I'm personally super excited about. And I really love what the Caribbean nations and some of the in Asia are doing, how they are embracing the digital nomads by offering, for example, one-year visas for bringing the family, working from home. As we see working from home becoming more important, it's interesting how these nations are really leading the way in terms of thinking creatively and thinking outside of the box. Also turning high-end resorts into timeshare options. We know we've already seen some of the resorts have been turned into quarantine facilities, but now even this is going a step further. These resorts are thinking, okay, so how can we capitalize on these opportunities that COVID-19 is presenting? So those are just in short some of the global observations. And again, this changes every single day. It's my morning routine to go in and see, okay, what's changed today? Where are we with the COVID-19 situation? Obviously, Nelson Mandela is one of my favorite leaders, and I admire him and respect him so much. And this is such an interesting quote from him and very applicable. I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. The brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers that fear. And I think that this is a wonderful quote to start us off by starting to unpack leadership during times of crisis by the words of one of the most amazing leaders in the history of all time. So what does leadership mean during times of crisis for us? This is a personal passion of mine, and it's also something that I feel very strongly about, taking care of yourself. This includes your mind, your body, your spirit. There is so much fear, there is so much uncertainty out there at the moment. And for us as leaders, entrepreneurs, business owners, very often it feels quite alone at the top during this time of crisis. So finding the resources, finding help even, and looking after ourselves is quite important. And I think probably the most important thing to do, because how can we be of any help or resources for our people, or how do we contribute best to our economies during a time of crisis if we are personally not feeling up to the task? So these are my tips that I want to share with you in terms of what you need to remember as a leader during this time of crisis, or just be reminded of, I guess. Reaffirm your business's true north. It's very easy to forget what we are really about, why we started this business in the beginning, why are we doing what we are doing. It's very easy to forget that during a time of crisis. So what is most important to your business? Why is that valuable to protect? What do you want to protect during this time of crisis? And what is it about your business that is going to be essential on the other side? You have to protect that. Be true to your value proposition. So this also means understanding, and if you don't understand or know what your core values of your business is, what your culture and ultimate your strategy is, I mean, this is a great time to do it. Work with a Business Link Pacific advisor, understand your strategic vision, goals and objectives, and really unpack your core values, because those are the things that's going to carry you through a crisis. The values needs to be understood and infiltrated, not just by top management or for business owners, but it really needs to be embraced by the people, because those values are very often what carries us through during times of crisis. And as a leader, we need to understand how important that is, and we need to confirm that with our people and really, I guess, lead by example. Know your worth as well. As a leader, it's very easy to forget that during times of crisis, what is important. And if you lead by example and you feel confident and strong, and your mental health and well-being and your state of mind is positive and proactive, it doesn't have to be all the time. We know it's really a roller coaster, and it's not just for me, myself, working within my own businesses, but I see that working with clients as we continue to unpack ideas and help clients and small businesses and medium-sized enterprises in the Pacific deal with this crisis. So I always say your leadership style is your superpower. Who you are as a leader, and we're not the same, and that's good, is really what makes your business stand out and what really takes you from being a good manager to being an exceptional visionary leader. Think here, resolve, resilience. How do you return to your business? And we'll talk a bit later more about how to become a COVID-19 responsible operator. How do you return? Reimagine tourism, reimagine your business, and then reform. I think these are key considerations. And I like to always take a time of crisis to not only think about where I am as a leader or as a manager or as a business owner, but also try and think of creative ideas. I mean, this is the time for us to be thinking outside of the pandemic box. Positive accountability and the truth. I think this is solid. You have to take responsibility and accountability for your business and for your people. And the truth, being transparent and really giving the facts is critical during a time of crisis, if not always, but now it's even more important. Having foresight and sharing facts. There's so much speculation out there. It's so easy to be lost in all the negativity and all the news and the information that's flooding our social media feed, and it's flooding the news every single day. Every conversation we're having with somebody is talking about this. So it's easy to get distracted, but it's important to remember and focus on the facts. What do we know and how do we deal with that? Obviously, for me as a leader, I think, and as a business owner, people should always come first. It's not a cliche. If we don't know that already before this crisis, is really important to know that right now. You can't really do anything without your people. And the trust that you have generated over time, or the trust that will be instilled upon you as a business owner or business leader during this time of crisis, is really what's going to pull your company or your SME through. Adaptability and having a sense of urgency about what needs to happen, I think, is also important. If you can't adapt to change, if you can't embrace these challenges and understand the urgency of that, I think it becomes a bit more challenging to be able to find the right resilience to be able to bounce back from this crisis. This one I think is quite interesting. I just look at what leaders is doing in the world right now, and vulnerability over invincibility for me is actually quite important. And if you thought about who your leadership crisis COVID-19 response idol would be, I think this is probably something that you considered already. Somebody that is real, somebody that understands the challenge, and somebody that doesn't shy away from fear, but also focuses on the facts and doesn't want to be personally invincible during this time. Somebody that can admit mistakes, somebody that can understand what's required during this time, for me, shines like a bright star during this crisis. So it's not about being invincible, it's about being real and being. Communicate. I think this really builds trust through the transformation process, or through change, or through any crisis. I always remember, and this is something I learned very early on in my career, and my mentor, my business coach, taught me this very early on. When you are communicating, you have to say something, especially if it's an important message during the times of crisis. You have to say something 10 times in 10 different ways. And then even if you do that, people only retain 10% of what was being said. So say it 10 times, 10 different ways for people to retain 10%. That really means that message needs to be crystal clear, and it needs to be repeated, and also in different ways, so that every single person in your team understands what you are trying to say. And then it needs to be consistent, and it needs to be updated and adapted all the time. So communication is critical. Motivating staff under the best of circumstances is really difficult. I don't have to elaborate to any business owner in the Pacific to understand that we work on different times. We flow at a different pace. We have Solomon's time. I know there's Fiji time and all sorts of interesting times across the Pacific. So just motivating staff to rock up, to show up fully during this time of crisis, I found has been quite interesting and quite challenging. The show must go on. We know it will look completely different, but motivating staff and motivating your people and your team to show up. Sure, productivity will be different. Sure, it will look different working from home and having Zoom meetings and having all these different types of digital tools that help us to still stay in touch with our team. It will look different, but staff and our people, you need to motivate them as a leader to really rock up, because how do we start rebuilding? How do we start reforming the face of travel? It's now, and people need to show up for that. Listening is really important, but listen as you strive to and try and stay close to the new normal. It's hard because things does look different. I'm just talking about my own businesses at the moment. Well, there's not much happening. So how do you try and motivate and listen to your team to be able to still try and stay as close as possible to normal operations that you can? We know that we don't have any tourists at the moment, but you still need to keep things flowing. The business still needs to be open. We need to look differently at our domestic markets and all sorts of interesting ideas that we'll unpack a bit further. But balancing panic and fear and paralysis, perhaps for most of us, this has now come and gone. But as new information becomes available and as this pandemic continues to linger, I think this is going to be continuing to be important for us as leaders. And this is, again, something that I would like to talk about a little bit later on in the webinar presentation. How do we formulate a mental health and wellness strategy and plan? And this is very important that you keep it close by and you start managing those fears and also managing those specific things like burnout or uncertainty that filters through into the workplace. You have to be bold and embrace risks. I don't think it's time for us, for leaders, to play safe. It doesn't always work during a time of crisis. Obviously, there are some amazing strategies and building blocks and management of risks and things like that we need to keep in mind, and those will always be important. But I think here leadership really requires innovation and thinking outside of the pandemic or the tourism box. Even the ideas that you have shared as an SME in the Pacific really shows me that you are being innovative, you are being creative, you are thinking of different ways to weather this COVID-19 storm. But it's also making quick decisions and perhaps taking more calculated risks. Calculated risks becomes an interesting phenomenon because there is so much unknown out there, but really being strong and bold in your decision making during a time of crisis, I think, are key characteristics that any leader should really embrace during this time. If you're not sure or you need some help, I think this is a great time for you to reach out to your Business Link Pacific advisor and let us help you to fine-tune your specific leadership style. What is your superpower and what is your true north as a company? And of course, this is the time for us to introduce our first short clip. I've had the beauty of working with some amazing fellow Business Link Pacific advisors, and we have a few stories that they, thank you to all of them, shared with us, and I want to share that with you right now. We have Bridgefoot Consulting, EVM Global Consulting, and Morris and Shujoski Chartered Accountants from the Solomons that has shared some wonderful stories with us. So I'm going to just stop sharing my screen and perhaps hand it over to Anusha.
Thanks, Belinda. I'll put that video on right now. If you can just mute your microphone.
Yes.
Generally, I think what people have got to do is make sure that they're I think what people have got to do is make sure that they keep in touch with their banks if they're having cash flow problems. About an hour ago, I had a phone call from one of the commercial banks here about what assistance we may be able to give some of their clients, and the indication is that people are not talking to them, letting them know that they are having some cash flow problems. And I think that's an issue with the majority of businesses when things are tough. As I keep saying to people, that go and talk to your bank and you'll get a better reception from them than doing nothing, and then eventually they come back to you and say, no, we're just going to stop your facility.
Right.
So I think people, that would be, I suppose, the message that I would try to get across to SMEs. If they are having any issues with their cash flow and with meeting their obligations with the banks, or even with their major creditors, they should be talking to them now, sooner the better, and so they can actually put something in place that will enable them to continue to this period. I mean, we all know that it's an uncertain period of time. Nobody can say that come the end of this year, everything's going to be okay. We actually have no idea whatsoever. We have no idea what this government is likely to do if we do get a COVID-19 situation. I mean, I think one of the concerns people have is that it'll be an immediate reaction instead of a gradual reaction.
Yeah. Wow, that's very true. Wayne, thank you so much. I think to summarize, I think what you're saying is critically important for small, medium-sized enterprises, first of all, talking about your experience and making sure that you talk to your bank, look at your major people that you need to pay, and try and put a plan in place as early on as possible. Wayne, thanks for that. That's some really great advice. And we know you need to run, so at any stage you need to disappear, please feel free to do so. We're going to move over to Chris. Chris, I know you're going to share with us some tips and our client stories as it pertains to your area. One of your areas, one of many areas of competence as a Business Link Pacific advisor is human resources management and looking at how we deal with staffing issues during this time. Would you like to take over and share your story, please?
Okay, I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
cool. Amazing.
For the rest of us, can
okay.
we put our speakers just on mute, please, guys? We're picking up wonderful.
Okay, I can't hear you now, but I assume I can carry on talking. So you asked me to focus around HR. HR is people, and the main people in a small business obviously are the owners. One of the things I feel quite strongly about during this period is there's a lot of gloom and doom around, and there's a lot of difficult messages. And we hear a lot of talk about the new normal, and no one knows what that's going to be. And that's true. But I don't think that helps anybody. I don't think it actually helps people's thinking, and it doesn't help their mental state to keep pushing that too much. So what I've been doing with people is focusing on and getting them to focus on opportunities. The opportunities offered during this period are the opportunities about thinking. Whether we like it or not, people have had time. And unfortunately, that's time away maybe from earning money, but it's time to think. Time to clear the decks, to actually prepare maybe for whatever this new future is going to be. I've been encouraging people to think about their personal goals, to think about new products. So an example is Parangiju Mountain Lodge in the Solomon Islands. So it's not very far from Henderson Airport. They depended totally on expats and on visitors to go and stay there. They were struggling anyway to fill, and obviously with COVID, no work. We talked, and my discussions with them about how they could reframe their thinking about the place. This is nothing to do with cash flows or any of this stuff, but just how could they think differently? And they decided to invest in help with somebody with social media. The person started to promote them. The first call they got through Facebook was from a relative of a senior member of the government in Solomon Islands, and they have since then been full every weekend to the point where they are about to build another bungalow. In this climate, they are doing better business than they were doing a year ago. And I was talking on the phone this morning to somebody who runs a cafe in Tonga, in Vavau. 6 weeks ago, he was earning no money at all. Pretty depressing. He went through the stage of being very depressed about the whole process and decided that, well, his choice was depression or do something. His something turned out to be a barbecue in public in the street. He's now up to 50% of what he was taking before COVID. His view is that that's going to continue to rise. So these are pretty smart stories. It is about the opportunity to think differently. And I think as advisors, maybe we have to do that ourselves as well. Yeah? Maybe we've got to think differently about our own businesses in order to be able to help others. Because we've got to go through a little bit of that grief and fear, because we don't know what's coming out the other side. But if we hang our heads down all the time and say, oh, good Lord, it's going to be terrible, or we rely on government to do it, it's never going to work. So that's a couple of little stories. Is that enough?
That is excellent. Thank you so much, Chris. Yes, I love the way that you've really focused on talking about the personal side of things. And if you guys join the webinar as well on Thursday, I'm talking a lot about that. I think there is a big integral link between us as advisors, as business owners and our business owners, entrepreneurs in the South Pacific owning small, medium-sized enterprises. If your state of mind go ahead.
So can I just add, and in the discussion, particularly with the guy in Vavau, he was saying that as he changed his thinking, he was able to help his staff change theirs, because they also had a very depressed state of mind, and that wasn't helping relationships. That wasn't helping things at home. Yeah, it wasn't helping relationships between husbands and wives and their kids. And you know, back to the whole HR thing. This is about people, isn't it, and humanity. And yes, it's a shitty time for everybody. But I think my challenge is, as advisors, let's help people look upwards. Okay, that's me. I'll shut up.
No, I think that is a fabulous point, and my heart is in exactly the same place, which is why this webinar is focusing a bit more on what we can do as leaders and entrepreneurs and as advisors. How do we focus on the mental health and well-being, not just of ourselves, but also of our team? Because if the leader is not healthy and well, the business can't be healthy and well. It's interrelated and it's interlinked. So thanks, Chris, for sharing that. That is spot on.
You're welcome.
Awesome. We're going to, again, guys, if anybody does need to leave, not a problem. We're happy to continue to share stories. Victor and I had a little chat earlier, and he has an absolutely stunning angle on business continuity, not only from his personal experience, and he's got a fantastic, rich history of experiences that's gained in many different industries and a very interesting background. So Victor's going to share a bit of a story for us, and talking about his philosophy and his tips on how to really focus on business continuity, managing risks or not during this time of crisis. Victor, please help us and share some of your learnings.
Thanks, Belinda. Yes, as I said to you before, in this case, in crisis, there is a matter of two things, threats and opportunities. The first thing we have to identify, when we have the threats, okay, what is the real problem of the causing this threat? What is the problem is itself? What is the cause? So if we identify the problem, we identify all the causes, we can identify the solutions. But in crisis, most of the time is a lot of opportunities. So we can see, for example, Second World War, Germany was totally destroyed. How is possible in 50 years they became the most powerful economic country in Europe? Because they take the opportunities. Japan on the other side was exactly the same. We go to Israel in the Middle East, exactly the same. So this is the issue, and the problem is to have be innovative, creative, research, and development. This is the main thing that we have to put in place all the time. But the most important thing is to have the risk management in place.
You can start, Belinda.
Yes, thank you. I absolutely love the enthusiasm from our Business Link Pacific advisors. They are not only sharing their stories and giving us encouragement and hope, but they are also really sharing with us their perspective on what's really needed during this time of crisis. So I love their enthusiasm, and I loved the way that they have looked at. Can everybody see my slide show again?
Yeah, perfect.
Perfect. All right. So this is just about the right time. I know I'm conscious about time, so this is the right time for us to introduce our second chat box survey, or review. If you would like to share in chat box for us just a couple of lines who your leadership idol is during this time of crisis, your COVID leader idol, and why? And we'll unpack that a little bit later. So please go ahead and share that for us. Anusha will gather some of that information for us. Thanks, everybody. Wow. If those stories of our Business Link Pacific advisors did not inspire you, let me go back to Napoleon Bonaparte. A leader is a dealer in hope. And I loved the stories because it also showed us how intimately connected we are as people to our business. And I want to share with you some thoughts from my side on the basics of a mental health strategy or plan, or it doesn't even have to be that formal for us as small island operators. It just has to be put in wording. I think here, simply put, a mental health strategy or plan means the mental health and our fundamental human needs as people are no longer aspects of work that can be deprioritized. It is interrelated. How we feel as leaders, as entrepreneurs, how our people feel ultimately determines the success of the business. And think about that for a second, chew on that, because it is true. And I think if we were not sure before how intimately involved those two aspects of us as humans and our businesses are, the crisis has really pointed it out. So I think mental health and well-being, and also understanding the importance of it and really focusing on the business, is something that perhaps us as Island Pacific nations have neglected in the past. There are perhaps cultural nuances, stigmas, all sorts of interesting things that goes against really understanding how important this is and putting it out in the business and in the workplace and in our communities, in our villages, in our societies, how important it is that we understand how critical it is for us to make mental health and well-being a priority. So preparing a workplace-specific COVID-19 shared vision for mental health and well-being, for me, is really important during this time. And we can certainly help you a little bit more to unpack what it means for your business. But during a global crisis, we see a massive increase in issues like depression, anxiety, fear, uncertainty, stress. We see eating disorders, feelings of loneliness, sadness, despair, substance abuse, alcohol and drugs, burnout, and in some cases, even possible suicide. We know that during times of crisis, those are the things that's really come forth. There are so many studies out there, and if you still need convincing, just search on the internet what we see currently during this crisis and how people are struggling to deal with things and cope with things, or just think about your own journey. So how can your SME and your employees deal with this? What strategies, resources are in place? I need to just mention here, unfortunately for us in the South Pacific nations, there are not always a lot of resources available. Again, it's something that's not really talked about as it should be. And I think this is why it's important that business leaders, owners, entrepreneurs take the responsibility of making this a priority in their business. Even if you have a little small business, a small operator somewhere in the middle of nowhere in the Pacific, it's still important that you put it out on the table and understand that your people would need your guidance through a process like this. So strategic priorities must include how do we prevent these things from becoming an issue in the workplace? How do we protect our employees' mental health and well-being? How do we access services of support, or is there a referral network within your community, your village, your area? Does your government have resources and specific programs in place? Customizing it to what your people need in your specific area. What are the issues? I know for us in Munda, especially during this crisis, we see lots of youth unemployment, and we have seen a spike already of a pre-existing problem where we see alcohol abuse becoming a real issue. So what are the specific recovery resources in your culture and in your country? I mean, we know that in all of our Pacific nations, the cultural, custom, traditional views on mental health and well-being and those nuances are different. So understanding that, talking about it openly within your community, within your team becomes really important. So the building blocks, I think, for the strategy, it must focus on the people. There must be trust. There must be full transparency, communication, and evidence factual based. So you also need to adapt the strategy all the time. You know, where does this COVID crisis lead us? What things are people struggling with? Is it the initial shock and how they've dealt with that, which we're kind of moving through? Think about the grief cycle and what people are going through. So adapt your strategy to reflect what stage your people are in when we open up borders and when people re-enter the workplace in a more formal structure. What are the issues that they're going to be dealing with then? So to finish off this, and I hate to brush over this because it's such an important issue, but I think just starting to create awareness and putting this as a priority within your SME is really the first important step. But other things that you need to remember through this formulation of your health, mental, and wellness strategy is getting commitment from the top is really important. If you are not the business owner or the leader or the manager, you have to get them involved. It's again, lead by example, practice what you preach. If mental health and well-being is important to you, it will be important to your people, and you've got to communicate that. Identify the specific needs of your business. Yours may not be the same as mine. My Pacific nation may not have the same resources than yours does. So really understanding what they are, what's available, and what are the issues that you are dealing with. As I've mentioned before, in Munda, we know that alcohol abuse right now under our youth is a huge issue. So what are the resources available, and how do I help my people and my team and my community? Developing a plan, communicate and engage with employees. A plan is only as good as it is on paper. How do you communicate that? How do you get your team and your people to embrace it, to understand these issues and bring them to you? How do you build that trust with your team? And then, like any plan, needs to be monitored, needs to be reviewed, and in this case, specifically adjusted as we continue to move through this crisis. As I've mentioned earlier, as the virus evolves and we're going through different stages of recovery and rebuild, the people reaction and what they need in terms of mental health, wellness, and support is going to be really be important. So how do you support and how do you provide resources and assistance as a leader to your employees and to your community? So if you still need help, contact one of us. We can certainly work with you in terms of formulating a bit more of a strategy and plan to help with your mental health and well-being of your people. But this is one of my all-time favorite quotes, and I think it's nowhere more evident, maybe a bit harsh, but nowhere more evident than now. It's not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but the one that's most responsive to change. And this introduces our second story, or second group of stories. And I would like to please ask Anusha if she doesn't mind sharing the story of Savi in Vanuatu with us, please.
Sure, no worries. Can you? Yes, thanks.
You're welcome.
Just letting everybody know that we are running a bit over time, and if you do need to leave, that's no worries, but we are recording the whole webinar. We'll probably go for another 10 minutes before Belinda has another very important thing that she needs to go into, recording a podcast interview for us. So if you do need to leave, that's no worries. We will be sending out the recording after the webinar, and it will be available on our website as well.
Good morning, everyone. It's Rob McAllister here from Savi Vanuatu, one of Vanuatu's leading business advisory firms. So I've been asked today just to talk a little bit about resilience in the time of crisis, which is a very appropriate topic here in Vanuatu. Also, and I'm going to use an example from Vanuatu Eco Tours, which is one of our other businesses. So I think one of the important things for businesses in the time of crisis is to make sure they fully understand their market, and especially understand their market segments. So really break down their market to those individual segments, and make sure that they have activities or products to suit every market segment. And I want to give you an example from Vanuatu Eco Tours. So we have always, pre-COVID, we've always done residence tours, which have just been run, for example, once a month, very low yield. We did it very cheaply. Our motivation in doing it pre-COVID was to really develop the VFR market, the visiting friends and relatives market. So it's an activity we always did. It was never part of our core business, but with the onset of COVID and the loss of international tourists, it's actually given us great returns, because our activity pre-COVID has seen that the residence market has been very loyal to us, and they've been quite committed to supporting us because of the activities we did pre-COVID. So we're now running residence tours pretty much every weekend. Most of them are booked out, which is great. It's still not high yield, but the important thing is that it's keeping our guides in employment. It keeps their work skills up to date, and provides a little bit of income. So I think it's just a good example, is that even though it was always the residence was always a very small market segment for us pre-COVID, is that the fact that we had paid attention to it has paid dividends in this time of crisis. So I think the key thing is that, firstly, yes, you have to understand your market, understand all your segments, and make sure that you have an offering to each part of the segment, no matter how small they might be, because you never know when you might have to depend on them, which is exactly what's happened at this time of crisis.
Excellent. Thank you, Anusha. And for everybody, yes, I also just wanted to note that we are running a few minutes behind schedule, but I'm going to be wrapping up in a few minutes, and I'll be talking next about what do you need to do, or what do you need to remember when you want to become a COVID-19 responsible operator moving forward. Another quote to just get us started: conflict builds character, and a crisis, of course, defines it. You probably heard me talk about this a lot. It's obviously something that I'm quite passionate about, but also something that I really truly do believe in. As we all continue to get ready for the rebuild and reopening and welcoming travel and tourists again, being a COVID-19 responsible operator is going to be really important. And here, the World Travel and Tourism Council has put together some very specific industry protocols that you can apply for. You can get the global safety stamp. But I think more important here for me is understanding that as a country, as a region, as operators in a specific area in the country, we all need to be on the same page. We all need to have common rules in place as it pertains to the guarantees that we offer travelers and tourists on the other side. And these are the things that we need to start putting in place to move forward. I have to say, I think as a Pacific region, we are lacking behind adopting these common rules and adopting these protocols. I see so many international island nations, countries adopting the WTTC global protocol. So just something to keep in mind. For us, it's a bit easier within the dive industry as an example, because we have really specific protocols in place and guidelines. How do we become COVID-19 ready? What do we need to do in terms of making sure our guests are safe? But there are very specific industry guidelines and protocols across all sectors that becomes important here. And I think as a Pacific region, we need to really start embracing these and endorse it across the board. And as an operator, it's not just you being ready and having strict health, hygiene, and global protocols in place, but also all your partners needs to, because otherwise, if you're a standalone operator, if I'm just the one that's getting everything right in Munda, yet we don't see those protocols being reflected in the aviation industry, in our transport industry, in the accommodation partners, hospitality, I can reassure you people will not be coming to travel to the Solomon Islands and specific to Munda, because it's not a global standard that we see across. So this is something I think that is really important for us to start taking notice of. We know that when the traveler does travel again on the other side, health, safety, hygiene will be first, and that will be critically important for them. So as we reimagine tourism, we know that beyond this health crisis, we need to really look at the intricate social value through innovation, sustainability, and how we can have a really positive impact on people and the planet on the other side. Public and private partnerships here will be really important. It's not just us as operators that's going to have to understand how important it is to have the right message that goes out in terms of shared safety messages, corporate governments, but it also our governments that needs to embrace as a country. These are the health, safety, and hygiene first protocols that we would have in place. Communicating that is obviously essential. Messages based on ethics, transparency, trust is really critical during a time of crisis. And as we are reimagining and rebuilding tourism, for example, in our South Pacific nations or Pacific nations, smart use of social media is going to be important because the message needs to be mirrored and as common rules needs to be put in place, and we all need to talk the same language. I love, for example, here what the Solomon Islands has done in terms of putting out the branding message, Solomon is still here, and all of us needing to start mirroring that same message to be able to say, we're all on the same page, we are still here, we know travel is not safe right now, but we will be waiting for you on the other side. So becoming a COVID-19 responsible operator, you need to start working on it now. Not just you as an operator, but your entire sector, industry, country, and even your government. So I think this is something that we all have a responsibility in as a Pacific region to start putting those protocols in place and talk the same language to make sure that we are more competitive as a region on the other side of all of this. So yes, on that, maybe we can quickly check in with Anusha if we have a little bit of time. Thanks for sticking with us, guys, and just see what's the leadership idols. Who are they and what are people saying?
Well, Belinda, it's overwhelming at the moment. We've got 3 responses so far, and it's our wonderful New Zealand Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, that people are saying is their leadership crisis. Their leadership idol during this crisis. So Chris Alphick has said she's a woman, no ego, she's caring and humane. Sharon Spencer said because she's an excellent communicator, motivator, and listener, bold in establishing and maintaining COVID-19 restrictions and guidelines, yet she is also vulnerable and admits mistakes, e.g. the initial border quarantine cracks. And as a Kiwi, I can attest to the fact that she has been an incredible leadership idol for us. We, can't really say much more than that. I would totally agree.
That is fabulous, and I totally agree. So, by the way, as well, wonderful. Thanks everybody for participating in that. That's really cool. All right, as we move into wrapping up, the secret of crisis management is not good versus bad. It's preventing the bad from getting worse. I don't know if we have much time for questions and answers, but Anusha, is there anybody that has this fabulous question that I just have to answer, or what do we look like in terms of questions?
We don't have any questions from anyone yet, but guys, if you do think of any questions, you can send me an email to media@businesslinkpacific.com, and I can forward it on to Belinda, and she can email you separately. We've got a thank you from John Warmington. Thank you, very informative. But yeah, we could probably start wrapping up. And I mean, you've got so much amazing knowledge to share, and I feel a part 3 coming on. You know.
Yes, please. Maybe people can pop their questions and help me formulate what you would like to hear in part 3. So yes, thank you everybody for joining today. Thanks for sticking with us. I'm going to wrap up with a summary. There is a new normal out there. We know that. There is an integral link between the leader, the entrepreneur, your mental health and well-being, as well as the success of your SME. It's critical during this crisis. We have to adapt, be creative, and think outside of the pandemic box. There is always hope and inspiration and opportunity. So by focusing on the 10 Ps, which we've covered in the first part, being prepared with a strong leadership culture, having a mental health and well-being strategy in place, and becoming a COVID-19 responsible operator will help us all as a region to align, cooperate, and reframe the future of travel specifically. So from my side, thank you very, very much. I really appreciate everybody taking their time. Remember, contact your Business Link Pacific advisor if there is anything that you need or that we can help you with any of these issues, or contact me directly if you have questions. And I'm going to finish off with 2 wonderful quotes. When written in Chinese, the word crisis is composed of 2 characters. One represents danger and the other represents opportunity. That which does not kill us makes us stronger. Some helpful links. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Belinda, and thanks everybody for attending this webinar today and sticking with us past 3 o'clock. Really appreciate it. Belinda, amazing again. You just have so much knowledge and so much inspiration comes out of your presentations. I love moderating your webinars. We will make all your resources available to everybody via our website and via email. Again, if you do think of any questions that you might have for Belinda, please email me at media@businesslinkpacific.com and I'll forward it on to Belinda. We have another webinar next week. It'll be presented by Akai Beach from Papua New Guinea, owner, operator of Beach Accounting Advisory. And we'll be sending out that invite for that webinar tomorrow. Thank you again so much for joining us, and we'll see you again, same time, same place next week. Ngā mihi.
Thank you.